Welcome back. First, during the first part of this chapter, we covered the demand side of a market, and now in this part, we'll cover the supply side. Now, supply is the responsibility of the producer, businesses, employers, firms. We use the term firms in economics. Quantity supplied, amount of a good, sellers are willing and able to sell. Sellers must have certain inputs. For example, labor. Labor is one of the most important types of input. I have to hire people to work for me to be able to provide a certain good for my consumers. Law of supply says other things being held equal, when the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied of that good would rise. As price of a good goes up, as a seller, I'm willing to sell more. And it makes perfect sense because now I'm making more money by selling it. Now I can afford to, let's say, cut back on my other responsibilities, my other plans, to focus more on producing goods and services because now I'm going to make a lot more money. When the price falls, on the other hand, the quantity supplied would fall. This also makes sense. When prices go down, I don't have that much reason to work that hard to produce that much. So I would just reduce my production. Later, we'll see that how it affects the inputs, and because the inputs also have their own supply and demand market, their law of supply, law of demand for inputs. What happens here when we talk about labor markets? Supply, let's say Starbucks is supplying coffee and lattes. As you can see, when price of lattes are zero, we're not going to sell anything because it doesn't make any sense. Why would you spend time and money producing something that's going to be free? You want to make a profit. So when the price of latte is only $1, I'm not going to hire anyone. I'm just going to work alone in my business and just make 3 cups of lattes. When the price is 2, then I can afford to hire 1 employee, and 3 cups I'll make myself, 3 cups the employee will make, and we can supply you with 6. And as we go, as we move forward on the price curve, on the price axis, now as the employer, I have more reason to supply you with more and more coffee. And this is the supply curve. If you remember the demand curve was always moving down because as the quantity goes forward, moves forward, as we move forward on the quantity axis, our price would fall, but supply is the opposite. As the price goes up, the quantity goes up. Remember, law of supply and law of demand are 2 opposite things. Market supply versus individual supply, just like market demand versus individual demand. We sum all the different individual supplies of producers together so we can have a number that is the aggregate supply or the market supply. Sum of individual supply curves horizontally. So, for example, let's say a market for vehicles, cars. We add Ford, General Motors, Toyotas, Hyundais, all different brands of automobile together so we can have a market for cars. Here's Starbucks here and Pete. We add them together and we have the market quantity supplied. This is the market supply curve. Now, supply curve shifters. Just like demand curve, there are certain non-price factors that could shift the supply curve. Remember, if the price changes, we just move along the curve itself. But if non-price factors, for example, customers' preferences, some dynamics of the market, they change, then we will shift our curve. Other things are non-price determinants of the supply. Let's see certain uh, factors. Most importantly for a supplier, input prices. Supplier doesn't have preferences. A supplier, unlike the consumer, who is an emotional person, has preferences. Like, for example, I like my phone to be nice and beautiful and the camera to be strong. I have preferences, but a supplier doesn't have any preference. A supplier only cares about profit, only cares about the number at the end of the day, only care about profits. Of course, this is the classic assumption. Now we know that there are things that are changing. For example, in the 1960s and 70s, Milton Friedman, the great famous economist, he wrote an article on the social responsibility of CEOs and corporations. And he said that the only social responsibility of a company is to just make money, is to make profits. Just go for profits and maximize your profits. That's your only responsibility. And this has a very strong philosophy behind it. Because when a company has profits, then the company has reasons to hire more people. Because I want to increase my profits further and further and further and further, I hire more and more people. More people will be saved from unemployment. More people can buy my goods. More people can enjoy a better life. And this is the argument behind this. Now, of course, these days, especially with the whole environmental debate, now we have certain other factors in the game. But usually, the company only cares about the numbers, just to make profit. And one of the most important drivers of the profit are your costs, which are determined by your input prices. Supply is negatively related to the prices of inputs. When your input prices go up, then I would have to reduce my supply because I'm not going to make that much profit. Again, this makes perfect sense. This is why economists are often not supportive of the minimum wage laws, because when minimum wage goes up, this employer will have fewer reasons to continue to employ people at the minimum wage. So I have to lay people off, I have to fire them. And when I fire them, I won't be able to provide that much goods and services. Supply is negatively related to the prices of inputs. Example, wages, prices of raw material, oil prices, for example. When oil prices go up, gas prices also goes up, so people won't be buying that much gas. They would not travel so often. They would stay home. They would change their consumption behavior of gas, and then the the gas stations won't be selling that much gas. A fall in input prices makes production more profitable at each output price. At each output price, when my input prices go down, I can make more profits. Firms supply a larger quantity at each price. The supply curve would shift to the right. This is when input prices fall again. When input prices fall, I will be willing to supply more of the same goods at that same price. So my supply curve, which is something like this, would move to the right. As we can see here, this is suppose the price of milk falls. At each price, the quantity of lattes supplied will increase because now Starbucks can afford to pay less for each cup of coffee in terms of inputs. I have to pay my employer some money, and I also have to buy coffee, and I have to buy milk. When milk is cheaper, I can save money on milk, and then I can use that money that I saved to produce one more cup of latte to make more money, make more profits. That would make the supply curve shift to the right. supply curve shifters. One of the factors, very important again here, is technology. Technology would enable me to increase my efficiency, determines how much inputs are required to produce a unit of output. That's efficiency. When I'm when I have better technology, I can save on input. I can, for example, make a laptop with fewer microchips, or produce gas with less oil. A cost-saving technological improvement has the same effect as a fall in input prices, which then shifts the curve to the right. Number of sellers would also shift the supply curve to the right. Increase in the number of sellers, which means more people are inside the market, so increase the quantity supplied at each price. Expectations about future, very important here. Example, events in the Middle East lead to expectations of higher oil prices. Owners of Texas oil fields reduce supply now so that they can save some inventory to sell later at a higher higher price. And I expect my input prices would go down in future. I would save because I am a rational person. I'm expecting something bad would happen to the market so that my costs would go up. So I would react accordingly. Expectations about the future. Or if I expect that, for example, my prices would rise in the future, then I would also react accordingly. Sellers may adjust supply when their expectations of future prices change. Of course, this is provided that the good is not perishable. For example, if I'm in fruits and vegetables market, I know that my good is perishable. I have to get rid of it now. I cannot hold my watermelons for a year. They'll go bad. I have to get rid of them. This is the summary. As you can see, price of the good itself represents a movement along the supply curve. Other factors, input, technology, and expectations would shift the supply curve. This is a second example. We'll cover this in class. Now, in order to have a meaningful picture of a market, you need both supplier and consumer, both the supply side and demand side. So you put them together. You have your supply curve, which is this, something like this, and your demand curve, which is something like this. You put them together to find the point at which transaction happens. This is the point when the consumer is willing to buy certain quantity at a certain price, and the producer is willing to sell the same quantity at the same price. This is the point when the two sides would negotiate, and then they shake hands and the deal is done. It's called equilibrium. Price has reached a level where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. What does equilibrium mean? It means if you start anywhere here, because of the forces of the market, or the invisible hand that we talked about, this is people negotiating with each other. People who are driven by profits and self-interests. I want to make more money as a seller, and you want to buy the good cheaper as a buyer. So you start negotiating with me. You will say, oh, I'm not going to buy this many, let's say, phones at this high price. At this price, I can only buy this much, but then I'm not willing to sell only 6 phones at this price. So we move along the price and we negotiate, we arrive back at the equilibrium point, this point here in the middle. And this is called the equilibrium, because when we arrive here, the system, the market would be stabilized. We'll stay there. Supply and demand together, equilibrium price where quantity supplied is equal quantity demanded. Equilibrium quantity is quantity supplied and demanded at a certain equilibrium price. Now, this is a discussion. We'll cover this in class time. But then what happens when market is not in equilibrium? We talked about it. When we arrive in equilibrium, we stay at equilibrium. But when we are not at equilibrium, what makes us to move towards that equilibrium? We have two situations. Sometimes we have excess supply. For example, we're here at this point, the 25 year. And at this price, I'm not going to buy. As a consumer, I'm not going to buy because my demand curve is here. So quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. That means the market has a surplus of 16 lotes. When you have a surplus, the consumer now has negotiating power. The consumer can say, okay, I'm not going to buy this many goods, this many lotes at this price, but I'm willing to talk if you lower your price. So they start to renegotiate, price goes down. This causes quantity demanded to rise. As price goes down, remember law of demand, price goes down, now I'm willing to buy more and more lotes. And also remember the law of supply. As price goes down, the quantity supplied will go down. So quantities will go down, down, down. At one point, they meet each other, and that would be our equilibrium point. Because of this fall, our surplus will continue to fall until we arrive back at an equilibrium point. And market is not in equilibrium, and we're experiencing a surplus, prices continue to fall until market reaches equilibrium. One example of surplus again, when, for example, there are like too many hotel rooms. For example, when during the Corona crisis, we have too many hotel rooms empty, so hotels will are willing to provide you with the lower price. And as hotels are willing to provide the lower price, some hotels will just close down because they're not making any more profits. So quantity supplied will fall. But as prices go down, some people who really didn't want to travel because of the coronavirus, now they have more reason to travel. They say, okay, probably if you just wear a mask and be careful, nothing will happen. Let's go see somewhere. When these quantity demanded moves forward and quantity supplied moves downward, they reach at a certain point. That would be your equilibrium point. Now, you may also have shortages in the market. Sometimes people want something really, they love it, but there is not enough supply in the market. What happens in this situation? In this situation, the supplier has power. The supplier can negotiate a higher price. So when supplier negotiates a higher price, say, okay, everyone likes it. I'm not willing to sell at this price. I'm willing to sell at a higher price. When you arrive here at $1, the supplier is here. The supplier is here. The demand, the consumer side is here. So the supplier says, I'm not willing to sell at this price. Demand is too much. Lots of people might buy my good. They're crazy for it. So I'm going to raise my prices. As you raise your prices, law of demand, price goes up, demand goes down. Some people who wanted this good, they realize they don't have enough money for it, they can't afford it, or they just can change to something else. They exit the market. Quantity demanded would come down, move here like this on the demand side. And as prices go up, now law of supply tells me I have the reason to hire more people, increase my inputs, and produce more output. So my quantity supplied will go up, will move. So as prices go up, one more time, Some people exit the market, some consumers exit the market. They just say, okay, I don't want this good at this price. And some producers would actually increase their production because now they can make money. Then the producers, remember, they just want profits, they want money. So quantity of supply would go up, quantity of demand would go down, and we arrive back at our equilibrium point. This is the equilibrium point. As you can see here, facing a shortage, sellers raise the price, causing quantity of demand to fall, law of demand, and quantity of supply to rise, law of supply, which would eventually reduces shortage to zero. And there we are at the equilibrium. Supply and demand together, 3 steps to analyze changes in equilibrium. Decide whether the event shifts the supply curve, the demand curve, or in some cases, both curves. When you're hit with a change in the situation, when you're facing a new dynamic, you need to come up with a new solution. You need to analyze who is going to be hurt here, who is going to win here, who is losing, who is winning, and how they react to this. First, we must decide who is going to be affected. Is it the supply side only, the demand side only, or both of them? For example, when a new technology is invented, I, as a consumer, I'm not concerned. I don't care about the new technology to produce microchips in computers. I just want my good, which is a computer. But the producer is affected by the technology because now the producer can actually produce more computers with less inputs. This makes the producer to shift the supply curve. Demand curve doesn't change. Now, after you've decided who's going to be affected, decide whether the curve shifts to the left or to the right. Is it a bad uh, situation or is it a good situation? Will the producer willing to increase its output at this price because of this event, or will the producer is uh, cutting on its supply because something bad has happened? And then when you arrived at a new point, you have your new equilibrium. You compare the new equilibrium to the old equilibrium and the effects of equilibrium price and quantity. This is an example, the market for hybrid cars, price of hybrid cars, quantity of hybrid cars. You can see now we're at the equilibrium point, everything is fine, but then something happens. You have a shift in demand. Let's say gas prices go up. First of all, when gas prices goes up, who's going to be affected? The supplier? The supplier doesn't care. The supplier just produces its car. A car doesn't need gas to be produced, it needs gas to function. So the consumer is affected. And a hybrid car is a car that is uh, consuming much less gas than other cars. It has a much higher MPG, miles per gallon. So when gas prices go up, hybrid cars are now more attractive to the consumer. As you can see, supply side doesn't change, it stays right here. But demand curve suddenly moves. More people are now willing to buy a hybrid car. Demand curve shifts to the right. We arrive at a new position here. In this position, quantity goes up and prices also goes up. Why? Because now the supplier knows everyone is really interested in his product, would increase his prices and also increase the output because people wanted more and he can increase prices. Therefore, he has reasons to hire more people to work at this factory and produce more cars. Demand curve shifts because price of gas affects demand for hybrids. Supply curve does not shift because price of gas does not affect cost of producing hybrids. Demand curve shifts to the right because high gas prices makes hybrid cars more attractive to consumers relative to other cars. And step 3, the shift causes an increase in price and quantity of hybrid cars. shift versus movement along the curve. Change in supply, a shift in the supply curve occurs when non-price determinant of supply changes. Remember, when the price of the good itself changes, we just move along the curve. We're not changing anything. But when other factors, for example, technology or input costs or competition in the market changes, then we move the shift itself. We shift the curve itself. Change in the quantity supplied, the movement along a fixed supply curve. It occurs when price changes. Change in demand curve, again, shift in the demand curve. It occurs when a non-price determinant of demand changes. So exactly like the supply side. A change in the quantity demanded, a movement along a fixed demand curve. It occurs when price changes, price of the good itself. This is another example. A new technology can reduce the cost of producing hybrid cars. For example, we have a new technology that makes the engines easier to produce. You don't need that much super expensive chipsets and computers and things like that in your engine. You can make it much cheaper. This makes a hybrid car easier to produce, less costly to produce for the company producing it. That means the company can now afford to build more hybrid cars at the same price. Supply curve shifts because event affects cost of production. Demand curve doesn't change. I don't care the hybrid car I'm driving is using a super high quality, super high tech chipset in the engine or not. I only want the hybrid car to drive. So demand curve does not shift because production technology is not one of the factors that affects demand. Supply curve shifts to the right because the event reduces cost, makes production more profitable at any given price. The shift causes price to fall and quantity to rise. As we can see here, uh, in some cases, when certain events happen, you have both demand curve and supply shift. In this case, price of gas goes up and the new technology available. So both supply curve and demand curve would change, would shift. In this case, we one by one analyze these events and we will move the relative curve accordingly until we arrive at a new equilibrium. Then we can compare the new equilibrium to the old. We'll talk more about this in class. This is another case. The price of gas rises and new technology reduces production cost. Now, this is an example that we'll cover in class. Now, how prices allocate resources. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. In market economics, prices adjust to balance supply and demand. Remember, we talked about the invisible hand of the market. This invisible hand controls the market through prices. Prices adjust to balance supply and demand. When something is suddenly more fashionable, I like it more. I'm willing to buy more of it. And the producer is only willing to sell me more of it if I accept to pay more. So prices would go up. As prices would go up, some people buy less. This would create an equilibrium. At one point, I'm saying, okay, this is enough. I know I'm crazy about this good. It's fashionable. I really like it. But I'm only willing to buy this many. And the producer also willing to sell this many. At the same price, we shake hands, tada, equilibrium achieved. These equilibrium prices are the signals that guide economic decisions, and thereby we allocate our scarce resources using these prices. And this is the summary. Make sure you spend 1-2 minutes reading it. It's good to give you a picture about the material we covered in chapter 4. All right, thank you very much. See you guys in class. Bye.